I'm very grateful in advance to our panelists, which is it's a really interesting group. I've been speaking with them over the course of the past couple of weeks, and I think we're all going to learn a lot here today from them. I'm going to briefly introduce these folks, but hopefully they will also expand on their background as we go here. So Emily Reid, to my left, is CEO of AI for All. It tries to create both educational opportunities and networking and job finding opportunities for people in the field of AI. Next to her is Jonathan McKay. He's head of growth at OpenAI. It is, I think, very exciting to have somebody actually from inside the company to speak to us about their perspective. And then Yvette Renteria is Chief Program Officer for Common Sense Media, which you know as a resource for educators, parents, students when it comes to what is appropriate and inappropriate in this very complicated digital landscape we all live in. And I'm going to start with Yvette because we're in here, of course, sitting on a panel called Responsibly Embracing AI in Education. And one of the things that has distinguished Common Sense over its history is the empirical evidence, right? You guys are always basing your recommendations on the latest findings. You now have this partnership with OpenAI around trying to create guardrails for the responsible use of it. Where are we in our evidence when it comes to the actual outcomes we know to be positive from the use of AI in education? Is embracing the word that you would use?
Yeah, so Jacob, I'd say, where are we? It's changing every day, you know, and I will share a data point that we had back in January. We had an opportunity to survey students and families around their usage of generative AI. And we asked the question to both the students and parents, have you used generative AI before? And in January, we had about 50% of our students that we surveyed between the ages of 13 to 18 saying, yes, we've used it, while their own parents, there was 30%. And so what we were seeing at that time was that there was this huge increase of students using it in their everyday life. Meanwhile, their parents at home may have had that disconnect. We know that now that might be very different. And we know that now we are wanting to ensure that there's this importance of bringing AI literacy to understand what it is and to explore it safely. So at Common Sense, you know, we've been around this work for about 20 years, all the way back when cell phones didn't exist, and providing tools and resources for young people to explore and understand healthy habits with technology. We were also around during the social media boom, and now we're here at AI. And so we're seeing this as just another form of innovation and ways we need to encourage our young people to, one, use it safely, use it responsibly, and be able to be curious about how it's being used and what information they're receiving from it, to ultimately be like the critical thinkers, the curious learners, and continually grow and achieve as they should, and go to places like, you know, professionals that could really advance their own career.
Right. Great. Jonathan, you are head of growth at OpenAI, so your role, as I understand it, is to acquire new users, find revenue for OpenAI. Can you tell us a little bit about, I know you've been there, what, 7 months or so? Also, by the way, Jonathan speaks some Mandarin, so hopefully he'll flex that.
就是蜻蜓点水而已。
Oh, yeah. I was like, give the people what they came for. So when ChatGPT was released, right, the broad philosophical thesis, as I understood it at the time, as it was explained to me as a journalist at the time, was this idea of kind of testing in the wild, and that it needed to get out there into the world to do that. I wonder what specific thesis you think the company had around kids and their use of this stuff, and what have you learned in that, you know, in the time since? What was the going into it thesis of releasing this into a world in which students could use it freely, and what have you learned in that time since?
Yeah, so I think, you know, going into it, we didn't have a specific thesis about education or about kids. It was really just, here's this tool. We don't know how the world is going to use it. It seems pretty intelligent. It seems pretty useful. Let's see how people use it. And I think it was as much a surprise to OpenAI as it was to anyone else that the early adopters, and one of the most retentive use cases is actually education. Now, the more I've used it, the more I've sort of understood that it is amazing for education, because education is fundamentally an information activity. And this is where large language models really excel. And so, you know, the way I tell people is, like, as of right now, ChatGPT is certainly better than me at Arabic, better than me at Chinese. I think within a couple of years, it'll be better than me at English as well. But these are areas where language models are really strong. And then if you can have it explain its reasoning, explain to you what it's thinking, all of a sudden it becomes as good as the best tutor that you can imagine. And so we see that in the product statistics of how people are using it. And I think you were hearing about that just a little bit ago in terms of why this is really exciting in this field. But inside the company, we're just, the mission of OpenAI is to generate artificial general intelligence. And so
Define that for everybody.
well, that's the trillion-dollar question. But the way we define it at OpenAI is that AI can do the majority of economically relevant work that humans do today. So that includes, learning is one small part of that, but then it's everything. It's basically saying that AI will have the sort of intelligence that exists in a human brain. That's the long-term objective. And I think it was just a surprise to find out that language turns out to be one of the things that AI is really good at early. And there's a lot of other things like reasoning, instruction following. Like these are areas that we're focused on now that LLMs aren't quite as good, but we're trying to get better every year. And in terms of like how we think about how these are going to be used, we're like, we don't really know. It's tough to figure out in advance. Like if you make something smarter, how do you use it? It's almost like, the way we talk with candidates, it's like, well, if someone invented magic and now you need to bring it to the world, what are you going to build? And that's a tough question. So our general answer has been, we don't know. We're going to put safeguards in place. We're going to release it to the world for as cheap as we can, and then see what people come up with.
So Emily, you at one point, were the head of education at Girls Who Code. And that organization, right, for anybody who doesn't know, right, is trained thousands of young women for careers in computer science. And as I understood it, the sort of one of the underpinnings, one of the working theories there was, right, that looking at coding and learning how to code was a way of learning critical thinking. You're learning this broader set of intellectual skills.
Exactly.
So now we're talking about a world, as Jonathan says, in which there's going to be, the argument for Girls Who Code for even the most mercenary person was it's going to be this pathway to something economically viable for the people who participate.
That's right.
Now, as Jonathan points out, we're on this path toward a piece of software that may very well function in that way across maybe even the majority of economically viable jobs. Tell us about the difference here. Where is your philosophy around the use of something like AI as compared to back when we had to code it by hand? Can it have the same value? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jacob. And I think that I love the theme of this conference is really so much around innovation and rethinking things, because I do believe that generative AI in particular, and AI in general, has really kind of upended the way we've thought about education, and particularly computer science education, STEM education more broadly. When I had this conversation actually with our founder at Girls Who Code. So I was at Girls Who Code really when that organization was scaling pretty significantly, and we really saw the model as these computer science careers, a computer science degree is going to be a ticket to an excellent career path for these young women. And it's still a great career path, but AI has drastically changed what that looks like, right? And we saw the tech layoffs at the end of 2022. I have lots of software engineering friends who are looking for work. It's not quite the same model that we thought it was going to be. So while it's still an excellent career path and something that I encourage for many, it has really shifted. At the same time, it's also made, this growth in AI has made computational thinking more important than it has ever been, right? And so two stories here. One is I have a friend who works in marketing and uses ChatGPT for helping to create content, and she talks about how a lot of folks have had this experience. If you're using it to try to create something like that, you maybe start with something, and she said, yeah, it usually starts with something decent, and then I have to kind of go. Ooh, everyone okay over there?
It's the light filter that fell off the light. That was close.
She's safe.
Yes.
She's safe. It's good. It's good.
The AGI is listening.
But if you could all just somehow continue to pay attention to us while keeping one eye on the ceiling, that
Yes,
would be really
yeah. Always be careful.
Okay.
So she was talking about how she would start with something and need to kind of repeat it and edit it a couple times to get to what she was wanting. And I said, oh, you're debugging your code, right? And you're just using English or your natural language of choice to be programming.
So you think of that as a parallel intellectual activity to the coding of where you really are thinking about it as a computer thinks about it, and as a result, you're gaining these skills.
That's exactly right. When I started in computer science, and I was one of the only girls in my class, I would kind of have these struggles when I was in the course and feeling what we now call imposter syndrome or some version of that. But when I would be kind of in my dorm room doing my homework, it was like, oh, this is kind of like an alien that can do anything I want it to do. I just need to know how to talk to it. And generative AI has created that possibility for folks who don't know how to code, but they can think about that through their natural language of choice. And I think that really opens up a world of possibility for both how we use AI as a tool in every industry and discipline, and also how we get more folks into AI who are representative of the users that AI affects.
Mm-hmm, right. So Yvette, following the same thread of, it's a new technology, it's transformative, it's obviously worrisome to people who may not know a huge amount about it, but there is sort of educationally redeeming purpose to it, at least that we suspect might be there, right? It's all anecdotal now, but suspect might be there. For you, give us a sense of what does common sense feel is sort of the most promising application of this stuff, and the stuff that does worry you. You've done a great job over the course of the Institute, of Common Sense's history of drawing these lines. How are you thinking about drawing these lines when it comes to AI?
Yeah, it was interesting as we started to explore generative AI. And initially, we were hearing from school districts. We engage with about 1.3 million educators nationally. We're about in 70% of US schools. And in engaging with them, we were asking them, what do you all need? And initially, we thought our approach was going to be supporting schools and districts with policy. As time went on, and as this wave of generative AI kept on, we started seeing these advancements. What we heard is we just need to know what it is. And so our approach was meeting people where they are. And I know we have a lot of educators in the room, and I know all of the major demands that happen every single day when working with young people. And one of the things we wanted to do was provide accessible resources for the adults working with the young people. And so for us, what was really important is just to provide basic foundational AI literacy, to understand what is it, for us to then become a little more comfortable in embracing it and using it and trying it out. And so we set out to provide some initial teacher education tools, as well as videos for students to just understand the basic understanding of this. And then we went on to be able to rate and evaluate ed tech tools that were using AI. And it's so hard to do that because there's so much going out there, and every single day it feels like there's a new tool. But as quickly as we can, we want to just provide, what is it? What's the privacy behind it? What does it look like to use these tools with students? How are they using or not using student data? All of these pieces of AI that is really important to us to securing and to providing safety for our students. At the same time, what are the learning opportunities, or what are the efficiencies that educators can have when using these tools? So we started off, like I said, with the idea of building just basic understanding of foundational AI literacy. Now we're at the space of providing just insight on the tools that are out there for people to access. And we're kind of going on into this next phase right now around what does it mean to have to use generative AI tools and still build the importance of human connection with young people. And so that's kind of our next journey in this for us, to be able to support educators on what can you do and how can you use it, whether it's efficiencies for teachers and lesson planning, or whether it's like what we just saw with Conmigo, using it for differentiated and a scaffolding instruction, to now what does it mean to really build a whole student and a whole community approach and involve everybody in the community so that still the importance of human connection and dialogue continues to exist.
And you must, I assume, hear time and again, as Feifei from Sacramento raised this question of cheating, right? And how do you think about that? How does Common Sense think about the guidelines around that? What is the beginning of how you're organizing your thoughts around that?
I think there's two ways that we're thinking about that at Common Sense Media. One is wow, what an opportunity for us at this moment of time to build the capacity of young people for the future. And so, yeah, we can sit there and we can talk about the plagiarism, but like maybe it's up to us as adults supporting young people of like, how can we think about pushing the critical thinking space for young people so that it's not simply plagiarizing, but it's like using the tool to expand their thinking or to build other ways of understanding and assessing our young people to understand what their mastery level is in whatever topic it is. And this is where I want to just give a huge appreciation for the educators in the room, because again, I know the many demands that happen when you're in that school space, and then you're like, and in addition to that, I need to learn AI, and then I need to bring it into the classroom. So I recognize the demands, which is why at Common Sense Media, we're trying to provide these tools that are easily accessible so that we can then really create a turnkey model to be able to use this. So one is like thinking about how we are using the writing process differently so that it's not just, using some tool to see if it's plagiarizing. And then two, creating like maybe more project-based learning opportunities so that we are we're continuing to enhance that critical thinking in young people.
Mm-hmm. So Jonathan, with inside OpenAI, you mentioned that you're seeing all of these usage statistics, you're seeing how people are using it. I know it's sensitive information. If there's anything that you can share with us just about things that have surprised you about the ways that students have been using this stuff, and then specifically because obviously so many of the people in this room are thinking about instruction in multiple languages, and as Sal Khan pointed out a moment ago, it's not quite there with Chinese, but it's close, and that with some tweaking he can get it there.
It depends on what model you're using.
Right.
Some models are actually better in Chinese, like what Baidu has put out.
Right. So give us some sense of sort of what the arc is here. Like, how are kids using it now in the company's experience? How do you imagine them using it going forward? And then speaking to this group of folks who are obviously dealing in multiple languages, what do we know? What do we think about how kids are beginning to use this stuff?
Yeah, so a couple of things here. First, in terms of things that are a little bit, that were surprising to me in terms of how students use it. Reading through thousands of samples and conversations and seeing what people use it for. They're not using it to be like, answer this homework. I've seen very few examples of that. The way people start using it, they're used to using Google. So they use it the same way they would use Google to find answers to information. As they use it more and more, they start to change the way they're going about projects. So, if I'm going to, write something or try and figure out something about Yelang disco, I'm going to start with, in the beginning, if you're just starting to use ChatGPT, you're just going to put that in to ChatGPT, Yelang disco 到底是什么意思? And there's going to be some sort of explanation. But as people use it more and more, they're actually they're going to start writing a draft, and they're going to be 我写了这篇文章关于野狼 disco， 你觉得有什么语法，或有什么语法的问题? And the nice thing is that even if you don't give a complete instruction, the AI is going to try and fill in the rest and actually give an interesting first draft. Now, you're asking about languages. One of the things that I've found really interesting is there's actually this very small gap between language models being worse than a human, to then being the same as a human, to then being better than any human. And I'm going to take a step back and describe what happened with the game Go. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, which was, for the longest time, Google DeepMind was working on what was meant to be the world's best Go player. And it was an AI. And they were getting closer and closer, and eventually there was this big show match between the AI and the world's best player of Go. And in game 3, there was this move that the AI made that was so unconventional. Everyone thought, oh, there's a bug in the system. I guess the AI is not there yet. But of course, the AI went on to win the game because this unconventional move was actually something that no human had ever thought of, and went on to win the series. And basically, that was the last time humans were better than AI at Go. Now, the reason I talk about this is because another area where, at least for me, AI has already surpassed what humans can accomplish in terms of language learning is it's very good at code switching between languages. So, kind of the aha moment for me in AI in general was I was like, okay, I speak some Arabic, I speak some Chinese, and I speak English. So I asked the AI, I'm like, can you compare for me pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah poetry, which I know a little bit about, to this Li Bai poem, and tell me what are the differences but tell me in English, because I don't think I'm going to really understand it if you tell me in Arabic or Chinese. And it can compare all these instantaneously and give you a really good answer. Or even things like, last night I was actually attempting to sing Yelang Disco to my daughter as she fell asleep. And so it's like, 那个物持007到底有什么意思? And that's like, that actually pulls in a lot of cultural context because, okay, I know from English like what 007 means, but then it gives sort of like, oh, well, this song has like this Cantonese influence and it's a callback to the 90s and these cultural references, doing it in a way that is very understandable to me since I'm not a native Chinese speaker. That's where I think the capabilities are going in a way that it's like, wow, it just blew past what we thought was possible, and now it can do things that are strictly better than what I could get from, even a really talented tool.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw an anecdote out here, and Emily, I'm going to invite you to react to it, and then obviously either of you I would really like to hear from as well on this. But so over the years, as large language models have sharpened up and gotten into the hands of students, I've done a lot of reporting on it, and I've spent a lot of time with students and educators talking about it. And I was speaking to a kid from Texas, valedictorian, editor of his high school newspaper, in all ways a very privileged and very lucky kid who was very aware of all of this stuff. And I was asking him specifically about these statistics that had just come out about the use of ChatGPT for, homework. And at the time, about half of American kids were copping to the idea that they had used ChatGPT to do their homework. And of that group, about 60% of that group considered it cheating, but had done it anyway. Then, when they were asked, that 60%, what is the reason that you think it's acceptable to do this? About a quarter of them said, I'm not going to need to know this information in the future because of AI. Why would I learn this in the future? Because AI is going to do this for me. So as we are talking here, and you mentioned, Jonathan, earlier, right, that we're on this path toward AGI that can hopefully do so much of what is economically viable. I remember this kid, when I bounced these statistics off him, I said, so how do you account for that? And he was so thoughtful. He said, well, he's like, first of all, you guys taught us, the pandemic, and you, adults, taught us to just get by any way we could. We get on Zoom and we just bang it out as any way we can. And you taught us that education is really for just getting a Tesla and a house. And so it's a transaction. And so why shouldn't I try and get it as cheaply as I possibly can? That's what you have taught us. What do we think? And Emily, this is a big one, and I'm sorry to drop it on you, but I think you're going to be able to do this. Give me a sense of how do we think? What is AI about to teach us about the point of education, the value of education, now that so much of what we traditionally associate with it is not probably going to be associated with it anymore, and kids are seeing right through that to begin with.
Right. Yes, a big question.
Big one, sorry.
But no, I'm happy to try to answer it. So I think that, I see education both as the way to solve problems in the world. I'm the daughter of a 40-year veteran of elementary public schools, and a college professor. And and my parents kind of grew up in a very much working class background, used education to get themselves into the middle class. I've always seen that as the way to solve problems in the world. And I still think that's true. And I also think that information is power, and we're in a world that's made of systems that have certain power structures. And the more that we can use education as a way to support students' agency, to use it as a way, Sal mentioned this in his keynote, asking the student about the chatbot is asking, what are you interested in? What do you care about? And I think that AI gives a powerful opportunity to students to use these really incredible tools for whatever it is that they are passionate about, and also to recognize that there's an ability to use it to kind of increase their own agency. I think a lot of times when folks criticize the field of AI or express fear around it, it's from this perspective of the sort of old line of like, the robot's going to take over, that kind of thing. And that is always, I've always rolled my eyes at that because it takes away agency from us as human beings. We're creating it, right? You're creating it, right? We're creating these tools. And I mean, our perspective at AI for All is we want to have students not just learn how to accept these tools and use them in a variety of disciplines, but also to then become the creators of AI and be sitting behind the desk and not just in front of it. So I think that's one really critical part, is that we need to be focusing on the skills like critical thinking, computational thinking, and also helping students understand that these are tools that they can use for the changes that they want to make and see in the world, ideally. I also think that on a practical level, as folks have addressed a little bit today, is that it's really important for us to accept these tools, to kind of not resist them. And my father was a college professor of sociology. He was always asking me, Emily, you know math and AI? I was always his tech consultant, because he didn't know what to use. But when ChatGPT came out and all of his students' essays suddenly became much better, he kind of, which you all experienced, I know. That was always his gripe. So he said, okay, there's something going on here, but he decided to kind of flip it and say, I'm going to actually use this in the classroom. And instead of having students write a series of essays about these different sociological concepts, I'm going to actually have the project be they're creating a sociology textbook, and they're going to use ChatGPT to write chapters in the sociology textbook, which basically then means that they need to show that they understand the concept via the prompts that they're creating, right? And so that's just, I think we need to be creative and innovative and kind of flip it in a way where we can then use these as tools for, traditional learning, but also really build more pathways for more diverse audiences and more representative audiences to be, to end up kind of behind the scenes with these tools and have that influence.
So Jonathan, Yvette, either of you want to jump into this one? I mean, how do you talk to a kid, right, who's in that little percentage, that 25% of the 60% of the half, right, that says, why do I need to know this stuff anyway? AI is going to do it for me. What's the point anymore?
Yeah, well, I mean, gosh, I spent two years full-time learning Chinese, and now I'm like, oh, what was the point of that,
Yeah, right.
Because the thing is, in the future, everyone's not just going to be bilingual. Everyone's going to be omnilingual. You're going to have a computer in your pocket that speaks Chinese fluently. It'll even speak it probably in your tone of voice. It'll speak every language that way. But just because everyone can speak every language, that doesn't help anyone to understand the culture. It doesn't help you make friends in China. And so that's why I'm actually spending the time and I only speak with our kids in Chinese. And it's really about, in the same sense that if you use a calculator, you still want to know how to do addition. You want to be able to go back to first principles and do something. That's still the same thing with language. There's an added value of not just knowing what the answers are, but knowing what questions to ask. And that's something where I think, that's kind of the human element. And that's what is going to be, I think, more exciting, because we can spend more time actually studying culture. And rather than, studying Chinese, I'll use that as an example, for 2 years in the classroom, only to go to Beijing and still have trouble communicating with people. You'll be able to communicate with people day one, and then you're going to learn about the culture directly, while at the same time, learning some of the key phrases and picking up principles. Yeah. And so that's kind of what I hope to happen, is there's going to be a much higher expectation of their ability to do these higher level cultural understanding tasks, while at the same time knowing the first principles is going to be what unlocks real mastery of any subject.
Yeah. Yvette, what would you say to this kid?
Yeah, and I would say what makes me really excited and hopeful is that we'll have an increase of more reflective learners, right? There's going to be a lot more opportunity for them to say, when I'm going to ChatGPT and putting in an algebraic problem and something pops out, I'm going to also have to understand and recognize, is this accurate? Can I explain this? And so I think there's this push to be more reflective. I would also say too, though, it really supports the different modalities. As a former teacher and principal myself, there were only certain modalities that you can actually teach with a group of folks. And now you're at a space where you can actually meet students where they are, whether it's providing them a visual if they're learning about another country and being able to see what's happening in that moment in time in that space, or whether it's engaging with another student from across the world that will speak a different language, and you're able to build that connection. Again, not dismissing the importance of that human connection, but I do think we're in a space, and it makes me really excited, even as somebody who is raising 8-year-old twins right now, to know they're gonna have access in a different way, and they're gonna have access to also be able to be a little more critical and reflective of their actions, of their learning, and really kind of take control. I think, Emily, you mentioned it nicely, having this agency to take on their own learning. So yeah, there will always be that I need to get this homework done just to give it to my teacher, but hopefully during this journey with generative AI, there's also this opportunity for us to ask questions, for them to know what questions to ask, to be a little more reflective and critical thinking, having that critical thinking aspect that's so important for us, and that I know that we all in this room of educators want so badly for our young people.
So speaking of critical thinking, so also in talking across a lot of educators over the last, whatever it's been, year and a half, one theme that has come up a great deal from the educators I've spoken to is there's this distinction they report in how we talk about AI and the use of AI tools depending on the educational setting that we're in, and this gets to equity. And in particular, they say that in places of privilege and resources that tend to be English first educational environments, the rhetoric is about it as a thought partner, and we're going to teach critical thinking to these kids, and it's going to be a resource for them in that way. Whereas they report that in places where English is a second language and second language learners are the majority of the students, the rhetoric is all about cheating and plagiarism, and how are we going to keep these kids from cheating using the tool. And it has always been the case in my experience in 20 years reporting on this stuff that tech inevitably reveals something about us. It's trying to tell us something about ourselves. And there's something important, I think, being articulated right now when it comes to our attitudes around how kids are going to use this stuff that says something about how we feel about those kids. And I'm wondering what, especially in an environment in which so many people here do deal with second language learners, how do we, this is a big question, I'm not sure any of the four of us are equipped to solve this problem, but how do we create an equitable distribution of when it comes to our attitude about this stuff, that we trust kids to be thought partners with this stuff and don't immediately come down on them as a form of cheating. Like the stats I just mentioned, a lot of these kids consider it cheating, right? That's the way they've learned to think about this stuff. I'm going to throw this one sort of open because I really don't, I don't know the answer to this one, and I'm not even sure what the question is fully, other than we don't apply our attitudes about this stuff equally to all students. How do we start doing that?
One thing I would start with is just in terms of, like, we are so early when it comes to, large language models and generative AI. The first models that were trained were basically just trained on English because that's what, AI researchers had available. That's going to change very quickly. And I think what's going to happen is, in the same sense that if you think of the internet in the early 1990s, it came out in English, and then people were figuring out hacks to try and type Chinese characters on message boards using an English keyboard. We're kind of at that stage with LLMs, but that's not where it's going to stay. And the good news is, I think that within a very small amount of time, these models will end up being basically at parity across all languages. And so that's actually really exciting to me. Because if you look at a lot of other innovations that have come to the world, it takes a long time to percolate out from one country to the next. If you look at China's economic growth, took a long time to percolate from the coast to the inland provinces. But AI is coming fast, and it's going to be coming everywhere, which actually gives a lot of other places an opportunity to catch up. And one thing I'm really excited about is it gives non-English speakers an opportunity to operate very well in an English environment. And it's not just English. Anyone who's a second language speaker in some foreign environment can use something like ChatGPT to actually sound and feel native in the language that's not their own. There's still a lot of dangers, but I just wanted to jump in on this because this is like something that's near and dear to my heart. The idea of growth and bringing a product to everyone, not just like coastal elites. Like that's why I'm at OpenAI. And it's one of the things that I think is really exciting and a potential boon that can come from this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, Yvette, I see your wheels spinning. I wanna hear from you too.
yeah.
I mean, we work with districts all the time, and one of the pieces of advice that we always encourage is like, what are you trying to solve for? What are your goals here? And always, as we think about that, think about the most marginalized communities within your own school space. And so we were actually working with a district recently who was trying to solve for all of the IEPs that they have, the individual education plans that they have for students who maybe have some special ed needs. And to be able to think of like, how can we utilize AI to be able to support the students, but also to be able to communicate with the family more efficiently so that the teacher who's supporting them isn't spending the hours of their day doing paperwork so that they're doing it for the legal reasons, but rather working with the actual student to advance them whatever the needs are. And so I would say like it's going to take extra effort to really dig in, to think about what are our goals, what are our outcomes to use AI, and really thinking about it from the vantage point of the most marginalized pieces of the most marginalized students in our community. I'll also share just another experience from my 80-year-old father, which he's probably gonna, I'm glad he's not listening, but he came from like this very alarmist, like, oh my God, AI is gonna take over. And what I realized in just talking to my own dad was like, there is just so many gaps of information that he doesn't know. And it's just that basic AI literacy to understand what it is so that he kind of can get to this place where he's a little more comfortable exploring and learning more. And I think that's the other piece to this in spaces where we work with young people, is you do have educators, you do have people in the room who are scared and who are fearful for a lot of the reasons that we're hearing on the news, whether it's somebody seeing a deep fake or whether it's this misinformation. But I do think that what's important at this moment of time is to ensure that we're giving all the tools to just understand what it is so that people can continue to explore.
Yeah.
Emily, how are you thinking about this?
Yeah, so I'll say, and just to gently push back my friend Jonathan here,
Love it.
I think I think that it reminds me a little bit of the way that some of the early conversation around access to the internet went, right? This idea that these tools will be able to democratize access to information, will create these level playing fields, and I think that these tools make that a possibility. I think it also is dependent upon who's creating the tools, what power structures are in place, what policy and regulation looks like, and all of the other parts of the ecosystem that we're in, and not just the technology itself. The technology itself enables that possibility. So the way that I think about it is that, and to Yvette's point, it is one of the things that we include as part of we have a semester-long accelerator for college students. We focus on students who are from backgrounds historically marginalized in the field of artificial intelligence. And one of the things that we do, and this is how I think AI should be taught for everyone, is that we teach really human-centered design. So, okay, you're developing an algorithm, you're developing a product using AI. Who is that going to affect? How are they involved in the design process? What kind of real legitimate voice or power do they have in that process? And we know that unfortunately it's the case that some of the negative effects of AI and things like, I was just on a panel earlier today online about talking about security and AI for women and girls and issues like these, these AI-generated images of like Taylor Swift that went viral and all this stuff. And how do we protect? This has been an issue for a long time, and AI is making this more of a challenge. And we still don't have the policy and legal structures in place to prevent the folks who can become victims and survivors of that kind of online violence. So we need, what's critical to me is that we're putting these technologies in the hands of everyone, which we have the opportunity to do now, but we need to have the educational systems in place, we need to have the legal systems in place to make that possible for everyone, so that they can actually be in positions of power to influence and really create a world where we can have this level playing field and democratize access to this information.
So last one for you as we wind down here. There's this not to get too nerdy here, but there's this thing called Jevons paradox. Do people know about this? So there's a 19th century economist who was studying coal use in Britain, and he discovered that as they were using coal more efficiently, and everyone had been promised that as a result we would use less coal, the opposite was happening. And in fact, we began to blow through coal so quickly that England basically ran out of it. And that paradox has been used in tech quite a bit to talk about this promise that it's going to save you all time as teachers, that somehow because the instruction is going to become more efficient, you will get your time back in some way. Anybody in here who's an educator knows that's not true, right? You don't get, no one's giving you back your time, it seems to me. And I wonder if anyone on this panel has ideas for how can the folks in this room defend against being asked to use this magical technology to do all sorts of instruction at this enormous scale across every kind of language and every kind of subject. How do we keep from becoming, responsible for 100 kids in a classroom using something as wonderful, but in terms of Jevons' paradox, as problematic as something like Conmigo, right? I mean, the pressure on you from a district to do more with these technologies is going to be enormous. How do we hold that in check?
I'll say one quick thing there, which is I think that it's so critical for all of us to be doubling down on the value proposition of being human. And as Jonathan said, you might be able to have a tool that can help you learn Chinese, but it's not going to help you build relationships, and it's not going to help you develop your own brain. And we know how language can affect our own brain development, right? So those are things that I think really, really focusing on that, but also, as we talked about AI literacy, and I sometimes describe it as like the Wizard of Oz, because I'm like, oh, it's AI and it's amazing and it's beautiful. And it is, it's amazing, but we can kind of pull back the curtain and really learn a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of what's going on. And I think that's critical for all educators.
You guys, thank you so much for your time. Please thank our panel for us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.